My name is Thomas Blackwood, and for 23 years I was the sole funeral director in the town of Millbrook. I prepared over 1,200 bodies for their final rest. Each one passed through my hands with the respect and dignity they deserved. I know every detail of the process, from the first cleansing to the last whispered prayer over the closed casket. But 3 weeks ago I discovered something that changed everything I thought I knew about my work, my town, and most of all, about the dead. I found out that some of them never truly rested. If you work with the dead long enough, you learn to recognize the signs. Rigor mortis setting in exactly when expected, body temperature slowly dropping until it reaches that final cold, skin turning pale like watercolor fading into the page. But most of all, you learn about the eyes, how to close them gently, how to position them so the family sees peace on their loved one's face. After 2 decades, it becomes automatic, almost mechanical, until you start noticing that some pairs of eyes seem to follow you even after they're closed. I thought it was just occupational paranoia. 23 years handling corpses can mess with anyone's mind. You start seeing movement where there is none, hearing whispers in absolute silence, sensing presences in empty rooms. It's natural. It's expected. It's normal. At least that's what I kept telling myself every night, walking the empty halls of the funeral home, checking if all the doors were locked, if all the bodies were properly positioned. But on the night of October 15th, while I was preparing the body of Margaret Thorne, an 87-year-old woman who passed away peacefully in her favorite armchair, surrounded by family photos, I knew I wasn't imagining things. Margaret was well known throughout town. They're a retired schoolteacher, widowed 15 years ago, 3 children, 7 grandchildren, a long and well-lived life. Natural death, no pain, no suffering, the kind of case that left me at peace with my work. She blinked at me. It wasn't a muscle twitch. It wasn't a post-mortem reflex. It wasn't anything I could explain with my years of experience or any manual I'd ever studied. It was a deliberate, slow blink, like she was thanking me. Like she knew I was there taking care of her, preparing her for her final journey. And then something even more unsettling happened. She smiled, a gentle smile, barely there, but unmistakable. The kind of smile you give when someone does something kind for you. A smile that acknowledges care, compassion, love. My first reaction was to step back. My heart raced, my hands trembled, but something in her smile calmed me. There was no malice, no fear, only pure, simple gratitude. I stood there motionless, watching Margaret's face for several minutes. The smile faded slowly, as if she'd finally found the peace she'd been seeking. Her eyes closed on their own, and for the first time in 23 years, I felt like I had witnessed something sacred. Something that went beyond physical death, something that connected this world to the next. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the funeral home's lounge, staring at the door to the prep room, questioning everything I thought I knew. Had this happened before? Had I missed similar signs in other bodies? Was Margaret trying to tell me something? I didn't know it yet, but that night marked the beginning of the most disturbing and at the same time most beautiful discovery of my life. A discovery that would change not just how I see death, but the true purpose of my family's presence in Millbrook. A purpose that had been quietly fulfilled for generations, without my knowledge. Here's the English translation of the next part. Let me tell you about Millbrook before I continue this story. It's one of those small towns nestled among hills, covered with ancient forests, where everybody knows everybody, and the only news is births, weddings, and deaths. Population, 3,247, according to the last census. 1 gas station, 1 Methodist church, 1 school that runs from kindergarten through high school, and of course Blackwood Funeral Home. I inherited the funeral home from my father, Harold Blackwood, who inherited it from his grandfather, Edmund Blackwood. The Blackwoods have been caring for Millbrook's dead for over 80 years. Our record is spotless. Every body that passed through here was treated with dignity and respect. Perfect embalming, meticulous preparation, respectful services. There were never any complaints, never any scandals, never any irregularities. My father always said our work was a calling, not a career. "Thomas," he used to say, "we don't just prepare bodies. We help families say goodbye. We give dignity to the dead and comfort to the living." He died when I was 31, a sudden heart attack while preparing Mrs. Wilson's body. I found him on the prep room floor with a look of absolute peace on his face. Until I started noticing the patterns, I thought I'd learned everything I needed to from my father. At first, it was small things, details anyone less observant might have missed. Bodies that seemed more preserved than they should have been. I'm not talking about expert embalming or special techniques. I mean preservation that defied medical logic. Skin that stayed supple for days beyond the norm. Hair that remained shiny. Facial expressions that stayed serene in a way that felt almost supernatural. Families started making comments. "She looks like she's just sleeping," they said about Mrs. Elena Martinez, who died of diabetes at 73. "Never seen a dead man look so alive," remarked the son of Robert Henderson, who died in a workplace accident. "You've got a gift, Thomas," said Mrs. Thompson at her husband's wake. I chalked it up to my technique, the care I took in my work, the high-quality products I used. My father taught me well, I thought. Maybe I'd developed a special skill over the years. But then the dreams started. They weren't nightmares. They were visits. Dreams where the bodies I'd prepared came to thank me. Margaret Thorne appeared in my kitchen, making tea and telling stories about her grandchildren. Robert Henderson showed up in my garden, helping me prune the rose bushes. Mrs. Elena Martinez visited the funeral home, tidying the furniture and complimenting my work. They all seemed at peace. They all seemed grateful. There was no fear, no pain, no sorrow, just a deep, quiet gratitude and a sense of closure. I'd wake from those dreams with a strange sense of purpose, like I was doing something far more important than simply preparing bodies for burial. I started paying closer attention to the details. I watched families' reactions more carefully. I began to notice that there was something different about how the people of Millbrook faced death. It wasn't just resignation or acceptance. It was almost as if they knew something I didn't. That's when I decided to investigate the funeral home's old records. Box after box stored in the attic. Documents my father had never shown me. Files dating back to my grandfather's time. I was searching for patterns, for answers, for anything that might help me understand what was happening. And there, buried in the bottom of a dusty box, I found my grandfather's journal. Handwritten, with careful script and pages yellowed by time. The first entry I read made me question everything I thought I knew about my family, my town, and my work. The pact has been renewed once more. Thomas must know when the time comes. Some secrets are too heavy to carry alone, but first he must be ready to bear the weight of the truth. A pact. What pact? With whom? And why had my father never told me anything about it? I kept reading, and with every page a reality began to unfold, one I had never imagined, a reality that would change everything. After the incident with Margaret, I couldn't work the same way anymore. Every body that arrived at the funeral home, every preparation I performed, every family I spoke to, it all happened under a new lens. I was watching, waiting, looking for signs I'd never noticed before. 3 days after Margaret, the body of Henry Walsh arrived, 72 years old, sudden heart attack while working in his garden. Everyone in town knew Henry, a retired mechanic widowed for 5 years, father of 2 daughters who lived in nearby towns. A simple, hard-working man, the kind of person you'd find fixing a neighbor's car and refusing to take a dime for it. As soon as I began preparing Henry, I noticed something was different. His skin had a hue I'd never seen before. It wasn't the natural pallor of death, nor the bluish tone from lack of oxygen. It was as if there was a faint glow from within, a barely visible radiance that made his face look more alive than dead. My first instinct was to check the lab lighting. Maybe it was a trick of the fluorescent bulbs. Maybe it was my imagination in overdrive, but no. Even after repositioning the lights, even under pure natural light from the window, Henry kept that subtle glow that defied logical explanation. So I did something I'd never done before in 23 years on the job. I decided to stay at the funeral home overnight, watching. I brewed a strong pot of coffee, brought a chair into the prep room, and positioned myself with a clear view of the table where Henry lay. The hours crawled by. Midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. I started to feel foolish, sitting there, watching a corpse like some character in a suspense film. Maybe I was truly losing my mind. Maybe it was time to think about retirement. At 3:17 a.m., I saw Henry lift his head. It wasn't sudden, it was slow, very slow, like someone waking from a deep sleep and needing to get their bearings. He opened his eyes, the same eyes I had carefully closed hours earlier, and looked straight at me. There was no confusion in his gaze, no fear, no disorientation. "Thank you, Thomas," he said, in a calm, clear, fully lucid voice. "Now I can truly rest. I should have run. I should have screamed. I should have called the police, a priest, a doctor, anyone who could help me understand what was happening. But something in his voice, in the way he looked at me, kept me frozen in my chair. There was no malice in his words, no threat in his movements, just deep, sincere gratitude, as if I had done something incredibly important for him, something far beyond simply preparing a body for burial. "You don't need to be afraid," Henry continued, slowly sitting up on the table. "Your father explained everything to me before he passed. You're doing exactly what you're meant to do. You're giving us the chance to choose. Choose. Choose what?" I wanted to ask, but my voice was gone. I just watched, spellbound, as Henry spoke with the calmness of someone having an everyday conversation. "There are things I need to set right before I go," he said. "Things keeping me here. My wife, Martha. She never knew about the will I hid, about the money I saved for our granddaughters. She's struggling needlessly." Henry looked at me with an intensity that made me feel like he could see right through me. "You can help me, Thomas, just like your father helped others before me, just like your grandfather helped before him." I began to research. I scoured every old record from the funeral home, every document my father had left, every note I could find. And what I discovered scared me more than any talking corpse ever could. I found hundreds of similar cases, the dead who had woken up during preparation, the dead who asked for help resolving unfinished business, the dead who thanked the Blackwoods for giving them a second chance. We weren't just funeral directors. We were something much more important. Something my father never had the courage to explain, something my grandfather had documented meticulously, but which had remained a family secret for generations. And then, at the end of the journal, I found the entry that made everything click. The reason my father died with that look of absolute peace on his face, the reason he never told me about our true purpose, the reason he carried that burden alone until the end. "The agreement is nearing its end," the final entry read. "Thomas isn't ready. Maybe he never will be, but it's time to pass the torch. May God forgive us for what we've done, and may He help us with what's still to come." I still didn't fully understand what my father meant. But I was beginning to realize that there were forces in Millbrook far beyond my comprehension. Forces my family had been serving for decades, without my knowledge. And Henry Walsh was just the first of many who would come looking for me in the weeks that followed. My grandfather's journal revealed a truth I never imagined possible. Millbrook isn't just a small, quiet town tucked away in the hills. It's a special place, a place where the line between life and death is thinner than it should be, a place where certain entities have taken an interest for far longer than any current resident could possibly imagine. According to my grandfather's meticulous records, in 1923, there was an outbreak of a mysterious illness that wiped out nearly a third of Millbrook's population. It never appeared in the papers of neighboring towns. It wasn't reported to state authorities. It was as if the disease had chosen our town specifically. The symptoms were bizarre. People simply disappeared. Not in the traditional sense of dying. They would lie down to sleep and never wake up, but their bodies remained unnaturally preserved. No decomposition, no odor. It was as if they were merely in a deep, uninterrupted slumber. My great-grandfather, Jonathan Blackwood, was the town's only funeral director at the time. The bodies were piling up faster than he could manage, faster than the small cemetery could accommodate. He was desperate, overwhelmed, on the verge of a breakdown. That's when she appeared. My grandfather never fully described her in the journal. He referred to her only as the Lady of the Forest. something ancient that dwelled in the dense woods surrounding Millbrook, something that hungered for souls, but could be persuaded to wait. The Lady of the Forest made Jonathan an offer. She would stop the mysterious illness. She would allow life to return to normal in the town, but in exchange, she wanted something specific. She wanted the dead of Millbrook to have a choice. The agreement was more complex than I initially imagined. It wasn't just about giving the dead a second chance. It was about establishing Millbrook as a kind of way station, a place where souls could decide if they were ready to move on, or if they needed more time to settle unresolved matters. The lady fed on the emotional energy of the dead, but she had discovered that souls at peace, those who had found closure, provided far purer, more satisfying energy than tormented ones. So she created a system where both sides benefited. The dead of Millbrook would have the chance to wake up one final time. They could choose to depart immediately for whatever comes after death, or remain a bit longer to finish what they'd left undone. But there was one condition. They needed a human intermediary, someone who could see them, hear them, and help them communicate with the living. That intermediary would always be a member of the Blackwood family. Generation after generation, we served as the bridge between worlds. My great-grandfather accepted the deal to save the town. My grandfather carried on the tradition out of duty. My father bore the weight out of love for the people he served. But there was a clause in the agreement my father never had the courage to explain. A clause I discovered in the most disturbing way possible. Not all the dead chose to move on after resolving their affairs. Some clung so tightly to the world of the living that they decided to stay permanently. These souls no longer provided pure energy to the Lady of the Forest. They became something else, residue. And when enough souls chose to remain permanently, the agreement demanded a different kind of payment. A payment in the form of a living soul. A soul that willingly offered itself to serve as a permanent guardian between the worlds. My father discovered this 3 months before he died. He realized that many souls had chosen to stay in Millbrook over the years. A debt was building, a debt that would soon need to be paid. The agreement is nearing its end, he had written. Thomas isn't ready. Maybe he never will be. My father didn't die of a heart attack. He chose to leave. He offered himself as payment to keep the agreement alive, to protect the town, to spare me from the burden of that choice. But the debt wasn't fully paid. It was only delayed. And on the night Margaret blinked at me, I wasn't just seeing a grateful soul. I was seeing the first soul to choose to stay permanently since my father's death. The agreement was being tested once again. The Lady of the Forest was watching, waiting, preparing to collect what was owed. And I, Thomas Blackwood, was about to find out whether I had the courage to make the same choice my father made before me. You need to understand, I am not a brave man. 23 years of preparing bodies doesn't prepare you for walking into a room full of the dead who've chosen not to move on. It doesn't prepare you to carry the weight of a supernatural agreement your family kept secret for generations. It doesn't prepare you to stare into the eyes of an ancient entity and negotiate the fate of human souls. But I had to know the truth. I had to understand what was happening in my own basement. In the funeral home, I had considered my home my entire life. So on the night of October 22nd, exactly 1 week after the incident with Margaret, I gathered what little courage I had and went down to the prep room at 3 a.m. They were all there. Margaret Thorne, sitting in a chair in the corner, knitting something that looked like it would never end. Henry Walsh, leaning against the wall, flipping through a newspaper I knew was dated 1987. Little Sarah Collins, who died of leukemia at age 12 3 months ago, playing quietly with a doll I'd never seen before. Old Pastor Morrison, whom I'd prepared the month before, stood near the window as if he were waiting for something. Mrs. Elena Martinez arranged invisible flowers in a vase that wasn't really there. Robert Henderson examined tools that only existed in his memory. Dozens of others I'd prepared over the years, all there, all conscious, all looking at me with the same eyes I had personally closed. But there was no malice in their gaze, no anger or resentment, only a deep sadness, a melancholy that seemed to hang over the room like mist. "Thomas," Margaret was the first to speak, setting aside her endless knitting. We didn't want you to find out like this. We didn't want you to carry this burden alone the way your father did." Her voice was exactly as I remembered it when she was still alive. Gentle, maternal, full of wisdom gained through decades of living. But now there was something else, something deeper, a kind of understanding that transcended mortal life. "We chose to stay," Margaret continued, "because we couldn't move on. There are things binding us here, things that need to be resolved before we can truly rest." That's when I finally understood. The agreement wasn't about giving the dead a second chance out of mercy or kindness. It was about giving them the opportunity to resolve the unfinished business that kept them tethered to the world of the living. It was about helping tormented souls find the peace they needed to move on. Sarah Collins approached me, clutching her ghostly doll to her chest. "My mom still cries every night," she said with the innocent voice of a child. "She thinks it was her fault, that if she'd noticed the symptoms earlier, I could have been saved. But it wasn't anyone's fault, Thomas. The cancer, it just happened." Pastor Morrison turned from the window, his eyes heavy with decades of secrets. 40 years ago, I committed a terrible sin," he whispered. "I stole money from the church to pay off gambling debts. I never confessed, never asked forgiveness. I carried that guilt to the end of my life." Henry Walsh folded up his phantom newspaper and walked over to me. "My wife Martha is struggling financially," he said. "She doesn't know about the money I hid in the attic, doesn't know about the insurance policy I tucked away. She's suffering unnecessarily, and I can't rest knowing that." One by one, every soul in the room shared their story with me. Each of them had something keeping them here. Unspoken love, unconfessed secrets, unasked forgiveness, critical instructions left unsaid. They weren't ghosts haunting the town. They weren't malevolent spirits trying to harm the living. They were lost souls that I, unknowingly, had been helping find their way back to peace. My job wasn't just preparing bodies for burial, it was preparing souls for their final journey. "But there's a problem," Margaret said, her voice tinged with a concern that sent chills down my spine. "The Lady of the Forest is growing impatient. We've been here too long, some of us, and for decades, and she's hungry." That's when I understood the true nature of the agreement. The Lady of the Forest wasn't a benevolent being trying to help lost souls. She was a predator who had found an efficient way to feed. And now, with so many souls lingering in Millbrook, she was ready to collect her due. "She's coming," Sarah whispered, clutching her phantom doll tighter. "She's coming to claim what's owed," and that was the moment I knew. It was time for me to make the choice my father had made before me. That was 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks that changed not only how I see death, but the real purpose of my existence. Since then, my role in Millbrook has completely transformed. I'm no longer just a funeral director who prepares bodies for burial. I'm a counselor, a mediator, a friend to the dead. Every body that arrives at the funeral home now receives more than just physical preparation. They're given a chance to speak, to express their fears, their regrets, their sorrow, to find a way to resolve whatever still ties them to the world of the living. Sarah Collins managed to send a message to her mother through a dream. Her mother woke up knowing somehow that it wasn't her fault, that some things just happen, and that the love she gave was enough. Sarah moved on that same night, finally at peace. Pastor Morrison asked me to confess his sin for him. I delivered an anonymous letter to the current pastor, along with the money Morrison had stolen, plus 40 years of interest. When I returned to the funeral home that night, Morrison was gone. He had left to face his final judgment. Henry Walsh guided me to where he'd hidden the money and important documents. His wife Martha now has financial security for the rest of her life. Henry smiled at me one last time before vanishing like smoke in the wind. And when they're ready, when they've finally found the peace they were looking for, they simply disappear. There's no drama, no drawn-out farewells, just a sigh of relief, a quiet smile, and then they move on to wherever they need to go. The Lady of the Forest is still there, watching, waiting, but she seems pleased with the new arrangement. Souls at peace provide the pure energy she craves, and I've become far more effective at helping the dead find that peace. You might be wondering if I've lost my mind, if maybe all these years of working with the dead have finally snapped something inside me, if this whole story is just the ramblings of a disturbed man. I asked myself the same thing until last week. A body arrived. A young woman, maybe 28 years old, victim of a car crash on the road leading to the next town. No ID, no family to claim her. Dark hair, blue eyes, a small scar on her chin. Nothing to help me identify her. When I began the preparation, following the new protocol I've developed, she opened her eyes and stared at me with an intensity that chilled me to the bone. There was no gratitude in her gaze. There was urgency. There was fear. "Thomas," she said, her voice thick with urgency, stopping me in my tracks. "You need to know. Your father didn't die of natural causes. He found out something about the agreement, something he wasn't supposed to know, something the Lady of the Forest didn't want revealed." She sat up slowly on the table, her eyes locked on mine. "There are other towns, other agreements, other intermediaries like you. But something went wrong. Some of those intermediaries, they've started to disappear. And now someone's coming for you." My blood turned to ice. "Who?" I managed to ask. "Someone who knows about the agreements. Someone who doesn't like what you're doing. Someone who believes certain lines were never meant to be crossed." She looked at me with deep sadness. "I came to warn you because I crossed that line once too, and I paid the price." Before I could ask her anything else, she vanished, simply dissolved into morning mist. No goodbye, no further explanation, just her warning and the fear she left behind. I still don't know what it all means. I don't fully understand what my father discovered or who might be coming for me. But every night, when I close the funeral home, I feel eyes watching me from the shadows. I sense a presence that isn't one of the grateful dead I've been helping. It's something darker, something that watches, that studies, that judges. Maybe it's paranoia. Maybe it's the cost of knowing secrets that were meant to stay buried. Or maybe it's time I learned the whole truth about the agreement my family has upheld for a century, about the real price we pay to serve as guardians between worlds. If you've made it this far, if you've heard this whole story, I need to know. Do you believe some of the dead deserve a second chance? That some souls need to resolve unfinished business before they can move on? That certain lines can be crossed in the name of compassion? Because something tells me, soon, I'll have to make decisions far beyond what any funeral director's manual could prepare me for. Decisions about life and death, about ancient pacts and prices that may be far too high to pay. Comment the word guardian if you'd have the courage to carry the weight of secrets between the living and the dead. Because I have a feeling this story is only just beginning.